good people. And we can see this in our media already. We've achieved that step because we demonize. You can see the demonization of constitutionalists, gun owners, veterans, preppers, anybody who wants to speak out against the government and support the original government under the Constitution is demonized. They are taught in DHS that people who support the communists, the Constitution, are terrorists. So patriotism is becoming synonymous with terrorism. Second thing is that they passed, step 2 is they passed legislation restricting the rights in the name of terrorism. And we've had that already. We have the Patriot Act, okay? Step 3 is restricting people from certain jobs. In other words, that's fascism. And that's when the corporate world and the government merge so that they control who gets hired and who doesn't. And you can see that today in the revolving door and how you can't break into certain industries because they've taken over the banking industry and they've taken over sectors of the government. So you are restricted from many jobs in the government. Number 4 is establishing a national police force to enforce new laws. And we have that. I've talked several times about the DHS and the TSA. The Nazis used the SA or stormtroopers. So we've passed step 4. Step 5, propaganda of terrorism to suspend freedom. So the propaganda in their day was the communist propaganda. And we have it in our day, but it's not the communists that we talk about, it's Al-Qaeda, right? Anything that you can imagine, Al-Qaeda is going to get you, so we better suspend and lose more freedoms and give up our privacy and so on and so forth. So we've passed step 5. Step 6, government indoctrination through the media. So, for example, this happens where they use the race card, for example. The Nazis did that, you know, if you were pro-Jewish and you were helping them, then you were against Germany. Today, it's if you're against the president, then you're a racist. So anything you disagree with the president on, Obama, because he's part black, you must be a racist. And so if you don't turn in your guns, then you must be a racist. Okay, so we've passed step 6. Step 7, destroying them economically because people couldn't get jobs. Jews couldn't get jobs. They didn't have livelihoods. I mean, they were destroyed economically, professionally. And we can see ourselves being destroyed economically because our government is giving bailouts to corporations who then move their companies overseas, and they enter into trade agreements where those corporations can take advantage of slave labor in places like China and Latin America or Asia, and they don't have to answer for any of that. But you and I suffer the loss of that. So bailouts, also derivatives, the banksters are destroying us economically. That has happened. That has happened. So we've passed step 7. Step 8 is random beatings and arrests. TSA and NDA police violence. You can see the uptick in violence and sexual assault by law enforcement or government agencies. So you're seeing the randomness of it. Sometimes they do it, sometimes they don't. Okay, so that's step 8, and we are past that. And that's what was happening in Nazi Germany. Sometimes they would back off, sometimes they would really push, but they really hurt people. And you can see that now, why I pointed out that video of that state trooper in Texas going right into the pants of that woman. Step 9 is disarmament of the citizens, disarming you. So you are here. That's where you're at. Step 9. So are you going to be disarmed or not? This is the process. I'm going to tell you what comes after disarmament historically. So after you're disarmed, then they have full control, freedom of speech, because if you don't say what they want to say, you're on the step 10 and they arrest you and you disappear. Step 11 is once they have full control of the military, the Nazis, what they did is they would move people out of their homes into government neighborhoods. Okay, so they would close off sections of the city. And that would leave the homes empty, which was nice for the Nazis because then they would confiscate all the property. That's step 12. confiscation of all your wealth. Step 13 is they then put you into the government ghetto. So step 12 is moving you out of your home. Step 13 is step 12 is confiscating your property. Step 13 is moving you into the government ghetto. That's what the Nazis did. So there was an incremental process, is what I'm trying to get through to you. It wasn't instantaneous. These steps took years to accomplish. Step 14, once you were in a ghetto for a long enough period, then they would transport you in cattle cars to the permanent working camps, concentration camps that had the factories on them for the military-industrial complex of Nazi Germany. That's step 14. They transport you to the camps. Step 15 is they actually separated males from females, and they separated the families. Step 16 is that they would feed poisonous food to the prisoners that would debilitate them. Like they would add sodium fluoride directly into the food, which is a sedative. It sedates the brain. That's why you're not supposed to eat toothpaste, because if you eat toothpaste, you can die if you get too much, because it'll go after your brain stem. They still have those warnings on toothpaste because of the fluoride in them. You're not supposed to ingest it. And it was the Nazis and the communists that discovered that it was useful that way, so they put it in the food to sedate the prisoners. And that's why they never rebelled. Now, 17 is forced labor and starvation. So if they do give you food, it's poisonous. If they don't, then you don't have food, you don't have strength, and you're forced to labor, and so you're pretty worn down. Step 18 is that they're going to feed you to ovens when you die, and you are actually going to carry your own dead into those ovens, and the mass executions. Step 19, which is kind of at the same time, is that the Jews policed themselves in those camps. They didn't have nearly enough guards. Like Solzhenitsyn said, there's not enough people in the government to police all the citizens and throw them in camps. So they have to recruit the citizens themselves, and the Jews became the most brutal overseers over their own people in the camps. That's something that Elie Wiesel talks about, and Viktor Frankl. They talk about that at length, that the worst guards, prisoner guards, were the Jews themselves to each other. And then step 20 is that they took children, adults, men, women, and the Nazis were very scientific, and so they did eugenics and all sorts of experimentation. They did sterilization programs on their own population. If you were disabled, they would sterilize you. If you're mentally retarded. But then those would expand to, sterilizing the Jews. And so you had all this scientific knowledge that came out of that tyranny. And one of the things that Jim Marrs talks about in the Rise of the Fourth Reich is Operation Paperclip, how after the World War II, Russia and the United States, us, had secret fights. The governments had secret fights over the Nazi scientists, and they pulled them. And so it was a secret operation called Operation Paperclip, by which our CIA got Nazi scientists, murderers and killers and psychopaths, and brought them here and their research. Some of that was used by Alfred Kinsey in his study in human sexuality, specifically the information that they couldn't obtain legally, which involved pedophilia and sexually abusing children and a lot of the sexual violence, those kinds of pieces. He could lift that research from the Nazi researchers. Other couple of things I just want to point out. So those are the 20 steps, and we're about halfway. Okay. So the American bankers provided financing for the rise of both Hitler and Lenin, and that's why they wanted to send ambassadors to them to get them to pay back. American bankers have never feared communism or fascism because they controlled them through international finance. And British bankers are also that way too. The question is, where does this all stop? Well, it stops wherever you start to fight back. Now, there's an article in the Warrior Times that I'll link to. It says, what happens when governments disarm their citizens? So it looks at historical examples in the 20th century of governments disarming their people, taking away their firearms. 1911, Turkey disarmed its citizens, and between 1915 and 1970, they murdered 1.5 million Armenians. 1929, Russia disarmed its citizens, and between 1929 and 1953, they murdered 20 million Russians. It's probably more, actually. 1935, China disarmed its citizens, and between 1948 and 1952, they murdered 20 million Chinese. So it's probably more like 60 million Chinese. 1938, Germany disarmed its citizens, and between 1939 and 1945, they murdered 16 million Jews. I think it's more like 6, but 16. Okay, we can argue about that. 1956, it's still a lot. Cambodia disarmed its citizens, and between 1975 and 1977, they murdered 1 million educated people. 1964, Guatemala disarmed its citizens, and between 1964 and 1981, they murdered 100,000 Mayan Indians. 1970, Uganda disarmed its citizens, and between 1971 and 1979, they murdered 300,000 Christians.